Brett, with his background with the different authorities, can attest to that, how important communication is.
Oh, absolutely. And the communication amongst all parties is paramount. Right from the beginning of a transition project, when a lessor approaches any of the individuals, any of the organizations to begin the project, it's imperative that everybody understands, everybody that's involved in the project understands what their role is, what aspects they're responsible for, what aspects others are responsible for. And when you have that understanding, a couple primary characteristics of transition aircraft are that basically they're you have to look at them as projects. They're project oriented, and you have to look at what the intended outcomes are. So in order to know that and to focus on that, of course, you have to know what the agreement is, what the requirement of the lessor or the owner is. So where you're going to find that is in a purchase agreement, in a lease agreement. It could be with a lessor that the aircraft is coming back off lease and it's not being placed anywhere yet because they don't have a forward home for it. So it could be somewhat in limbo, but you need to understand exactly what the current situation is, and everybody needs to know that. I mean, we've had lawyers approach authorities about deregistering an aircraft when certain documents haven't been issued to the aircraft yet. Well, once an aircraft leaves the register, it becomes deregistered, that authority no longer has jurisdiction to issue any documents towards it. So, that's an example of where continuing airworthiness would be involved in obtaining or making application to obtain those certificates, any required certificates. The authority would be involved in actually the request to deregister the aircraft. That would potentially come from the owner, and a lot of times it'll come from the legal team. So if everybody needs to communicate well to understand that whether different aspects are ready to be performed yet, and it's imperative that you know what the project looks like, because if you don't, then some of these things can take place and they can cause big problems. As Annalisa says, a lot of authorities, they don't put much credence in the export airworthiness certificate. And I would argue also knowing the requirements is knowing the requirements of the authority or the register on which the aircraft is coming onto your register or onto the transition register, knowing the rules of the transition register, and also being project based. It's important to understand, once you realize, or once you're made aware of where the aircraft will be onward going, to understand what their requirements are, because ultimately that's the success of a transition aircraft. Because the lessor's goal, again, is to have a transition accomplished within the time frame and the budget. But all of that's meaningless if it gets onto the downstream register and the new lessee, the new operator, can't operate the aircraft because all the pieces aren't in place. So although they may not be a requirement for having the aircraft on the transition register, and in fact they may require exemptions or exceptions, and we'll get to that. But all of these pieces have to be understood at the earliest convenience, or at their earliest possible time. I mean, one of the common aspects with most transition projects is that you'll be dealing with more than one authority and more than one set of regulations. So it's important that you understand these things. And getting back to communicating with the authority, nobody's expected to understand all of the different regulations of the different regimes. But certainly, if you're familiar with most of the ICAO SARPs, then there's commonalities throughout. I mean, they are requirements for every member state needs to fulfill one way or another. So you should have an understanding that these pieces need to be in place. What they look like might be different, and if you're not certain of those, you pick up the phone. I've seen email trails go back and forth literally 14 times and still not have a resolution, where I picked up the phone and called the parties, because I was copied in emails, and in a 5-minute telephone conversation, everything's been cleared up. So there's the form of communication is every bit as important as doing the communication.
Yeah.